"I knit and cook and find things," said my mother. "How else do you suppose I think of such ingenious questions? Do you think I would buy a slave who would outwork me in front of my mother-in-law?" My mother walked off to look at a group of hungry slaves across the street. When she returned, the dealer sold her the girl with a finding chant at my mother's price. "I am a doctor," she told her new slave, when they were out of the dealer's hearing, "and I shall train you to be my nurse." "Doctor," said the slave, "do you understand that I do know how to finish off my weaving?" "Yes, we fooled him very well," said my mother. The unsold slaves must have watched them with envy. I watch them with envy. My mother's enthusiasm for me is duller than for the slave girl. Nor did I replace the older brother and sister who died while they were still cuddly. Throughout childhood, my younger sister said, "When I grow up, I want to be a slave," and my parents laughed, encouraging her. At department stores, I angered my mother when I could not bargain without shame. Poor people's shame. She stood in back of me and prodded and pinched, forcing me to translate her bargaining word for word. On the same day, she bought at the dog dealer's a white puppy to train as her bodyguard when she made night calls. She tied pretty red yarn around its tail to neutralize the bad luck. There was no use docking the tail. No matter at what point she cut, the tip would have been white, the mourning color. The puppy waved its red yarn at the nurse girl, and she picked it up. She followed my mother back to the village where she always got enough to eat because my mother became a good doctor. She could cure the most spectacular diseases. And when a sick person was about to die, my mother could read the fact of it a year ahead of time on the daughter-in-law's faces. A black veil seemed to hover over their skin, and though they laughed, this blackness rose and fell with their breath. My mother would take one look at the daughter-in-law who answered the door at the sick house, and she'd say, "Find another doctor." She would not touch death. Therefore, untainted, she brought only health from house to house. She must be a Jesus convert, the people from the far villages said. All her patients get well. The bigger the talk, the farther the distances she traveled. She had customers everywhere. Sometimes she went to her patients by foot. Her nurse slave carried an umbrella when my mother predicted rain and a parasol when she predicted sun. My white dog would be standing at the door waiting for me whenever I came home, she said. When she felt like it, my mother would leave the nurse slave to watch the office and would take the white dog with her. "What happened to your dog when you came to America, Mother?" "I don't know." "What happened to the slave?" "I found her a husband." "How much money did you pay to buy her?" $180. "How much money did you pay the doctor in the hospital when I was born?" $200. "Oh, that's $200 American money." "Was the $180 American money?" "No." "How much was it American money?" $50. "That's because she was 16 years old. Eight-year-olds were about $20. 5-year-olds were $10 and up. 2-year-olds were about $5. Babies were free. During the war, though, when you were born, many people gave older girls away for free. And here I was in the United States paying $200 for you." When my mother went doctoring in the villages, the ghosts, the war people, the apes dropped out of the trees. They rose out of bridge water. My mother saw them come out of cervixes. Medical science does not seal the earth, whose nether creatures seep out, hair by hair, disguised like the smoke that dispels them. She had apparently won against the one ghost, but ghost forms are various and many. Some can occupy the same space at the same moment. They permeate the grain and wood, metal and stone. Animalcules somersault about our faces when we breathe. We have to build horns on our roofs so that the nagging once people can slide up them and perhaps ascend to the stars, the source of pardon and love. On a fine spring day, the villagers at a place my mother had never visited before would wave peach branches and fans, which are emblems of Chung Li Chuan, the chief of the 8 sages and keeper of the elixir of life. The pink petals would fall on my mother's black hair and gown. The villagers would set off firecrackers as on New Year's Day. Only if it had really been New Year's, she would have had to shut herself up in her own house. Nobody wanted a doctor's visit in the first days of the year. But at night my mother walked quickly. She and bandits were the only human beings out. No palanquins available for midwives. For a time the roads were endangered by a fantastic creature, half man and half ape, that a traveler to the west had captured and brought back to China in a cage. With his new money, the man had built the fourth wing to his house, and in the courtyard he grew a stand of bamboo. The ape-man could reach out and touch the thin leaves that shaded its cage. This creature had gnawed through the bars, or it had tricked its owner into letting it play in the courtyard and then leaped over the roof of the new wing. Now it was at large in the forests, living off squirrels, mice, and an occasional duck or piglet. My mother saw in the dark a denser dark, and she knew she was being followed. She carried a club, and the white dog was beside her. The ape-man was known to have attacked people. She had treated their bites and claw wounds. With hardly a rustle of leaves, the ape-man leaped live out of the trees and blocked her way. The white dog yelped. As big as a human being, the ape thing jumped up and down on one foot. Its two hands were holding the other foot, hurt in the jump. It had long orange hair and beard. Its owner had clothed it in a brown burlap rice sack with holes for neck and arms. It blinked at my mother with human eyes, moving its head from shoulder to shoulder as if figuring things out. "Go home!" she shouted, waving her club. It copied her waving with one raised arm and made complex motions with its other hand, but when she rushed at it, it turned and ran limping into the forest. "Don't you scare me again," she yelled after its retreating buttocks, tailless and hairless under the shirt. It was definitely not a gorilla. She had since seen some of those at the Bronx Zoo, and this ape-man was nothing like them. If her father had not brought a third wife, who was not Chinese, back from his travels, my mother might have thought this orange creature with the great nose was a barbarian from the West. But my grandfather's third wife was black with hair so soft that it would not hang, instead blowing up into a great round puffball. At first she talked constantly, but who could understand her? After a while she never talked any more. She had one son. The owner of the ape-man finally recaptured it by luring it back into its cage with cooked pork and wine. Occasionally my mother went to the rich man's house to look at the ape-man. It seemed to recognize her and smiled when she gave it candy. Perhaps it had not been an ape-man at all, but one of the tiger men, a savage northern race. My mother was midwife to whatever spewed forth, not being able to choose as with the olden stick. She was not squeamish, though, and deftly caught spewings that were sometimes babies, sometimes monsters. When she helped the country women who insisted on birthing in the pig pen, she could not tell by starlight and moonlight what manner of creature had made its arrival on the earth until she carried it inside the house. "Pretty pig baby, pretty piglet," she and the mother would croon, fooling the ghost on the lookout for a new birth. "Ugly pig, dirty pig," fooling the gods, jealous of human joy. They counted fingers and toes by touch, felt for penis or no penis, but not until later would they know for sure whether the gods let them get away with something good. One boy appeared perfect, so round in the cool opal dawn. But when my mother examined him indoors, he opened up blue eyes at her. Perhaps he had looked without protection at the sky, and it had filled him. His mother said that a ghost had entered him, but my mother said the baby looked pretty. Not all defects could be explained so congenially. One child born without an anus was left in the outhouse so that the family would not have to hear it cry. They kept going back to see whether it was dead yet, but it lived for a long time. Whatever they went to look at, it was sobbing, heaving as if it were trying to defecate. For days the family either walked to the fields or used the night soil buckets. As a child, I pictured a naked child sitting on a modern toilet, desperately trying to perform until it died of congestion. I had to flick on the bathroom lights fast, so that no small shadow would take a baby shape, sometimes seated on the edge of the bathtub, its hopes for a bowel movement so exaggerated. When I woke at night, I sometimes heard an infant's grunting and weeping coming from the bathroom. I did not go to its rescue, but waited for it to stop. I hope this holeless baby proves that my mother did not prepare a box of clean ashes beside the birth bed in case of a girl. The midwife or a relative would take the back of a girl baby's head in her hand and turn her face into the ashes, said my mother. It was very easy. She never said she herself killed babies, but perhaps the holeless baby was a boy. Even here on Gold Mountain, grateful couples bring gifts to my mother, who had cooked them a soup that not only ended their infertility but gave them a boy. My mother has given me pictures to dream, nightmare babies that recur, shrinking again and again to fit in my poem. I curl my fingers to make a cradle for the baby, my other hand an awning. I would protect the dream baby, not let it suffer, not let it out of my sight. But in a blink of inattention, I would mislay the baby. I would have to stop moving, afraid of stepping in it, or before my very eyes, it slips between my fingers, because my fingers cannot grow webs fast enough. Or bathing it, I could carefully turn the right-hand faucet, but it sprouts hot water, scalding the baby until its skin tautens and its face becomes nothing but a red hole of a scream. The hole turns into a pinprick as the baby recedes from me. To make my waking life American normal, I turn on the lights before anything untoward makes an appearance. I push the deformed into my dreams, which are in Chinese, the language of impossible stories. Before we can leave our parents, they just stuff our heads like the suitcases, which they jam-pack with homemade underwear. When the thermometer in our laundry reached 111 degrees on summer afternoons, either my mother or my father would say that it was time to tell another ghost story so that we could get some good chills up our backs. My parents, my brothers, sisters, great uncle, and the third aunt, who wasn't really our aunt but a fellow villager, someone else's third aunt, kept the presses crashing and hissing and shouted out the stories. Those were our successful days, when so much laundry came in, my mother did not have to pick tomatoes. For breaks we changed from pressing to sorting. One twilight, my mother began, and already the chills traveled my back and crossed my shoulders. The hair rose at the nape and the back of the legs. I was walking home after doctoring a sick family. To get home I had to cross a footbridge. In China, the bridges are nothing like the ones in Brooklyn and San Francisco. This one was made from rope, laced and knotted as if by magpies. Actually, it had been built by men who had returned after harvesting sea swallow nests in Malaya. They had to swing over the faces of the Malayan cliffs in baskets they had woven themselves. Though this bridge pitched and swayed in the updraft, no one had ever fallen into the river, which looked like a bright scratch at the bottom of the canyon, as if the Queen of Heaven had swept her great silver hairpin across the earth as well as the sky. One twilight, just as my mother stepped on the bridge, two smoky columns spiraled up taller than she. Their swaying tops hovered over her head like white cobras, one at either handrail. From stillness came a wind rushing between the smoke spindles. A high sound entered her temple bones. Through the twin whirlwinds she could see the sun and the river twisting in circles, the trees upside down. The bridge moved like a ship, sickening. The earth dipped. She collapsed to the wooden slats, a ladder up the sky, her fingers so weak she could not grip the rungs. The wind dragged her hair behind her, then whipped it forward across her face. Suddenly the smoke spindles disappeared. The world righted itself, and she crossed to the other side. She looked back, but there was nothing there. She used the bridge often, but she did not encounter those ghosts again. They were Sitdom Kui, said great uncle. Sitdom Kui. Yes, of course, said my mother. Sitdom Kui. I keep looking in dictionaries under those syllables. Qui means ghost, but I don't find any other words that make sense. I only hear my great uncle's river pirate voice, the voice of a big man who had killed someone in New York or Cuba, make the sounds "sit dum qui." How do they translate?